In this podcast, we will discuss the cost and benefits of banning ICEVs, otherwise known as internal combustion engine vehicles. This podcast will be focused within the scope of the United States, but will take into account data from around the world. The strongest competitors of automotive electrification include Norway, Iceland, and Sweden. In order to accurately understand the cost and benefits of banning combustion vehicles, the driving reasons for eliminating them must first be discussed. The 5 most common reasons that are put forward by federal and state government agencies as well as individuals include tax benefits and rebates, lower fuel and maintenance costs, special EV-only benefits like access to the HOV lane, higher performance, and cleaning up the planet. These 5 reasons for moving towards an electric automotive future will be discussed and their validity will be determined. At that point, we will then dive into deeper research regarding any of the remaining valid arguments for moving away from ICEVs. The first main argument is that of tax cuts and rebates. Obviously, this argument is not valid enough for any sort of significant move towards EVs as a society, as all subsidies and tax cuts in the United States ultimately come from taxpayers' pockets. Therefore, moving towards EVs as a society because of extra tax benefits is simply not a smart economic decision. The U.S. government at any time can enact registration fees to account for the lack of fuel taxes. This is not an uncommon practice, as Canada has already enacted such legislation. However, reduced fuel and maintenance costs appear to be a valid argument. Gas prices have hovered around $3.55 per gallon over the past 30 years, adjusted for inflation, and the average American typically commutes around 29 miles a day. With an average fuel economy of around 25.7 miles per gallon, the average annual fuel cost for combustion vehicle ownership comes out to approximately $1,462. On the EV side, this number differs drastically, with U.S. electricity costing less than 18 cents per kilowatt hour, and average EV energy consumption of about 3.25 miles per kilowatt hour. The average annual EV energy cost come out to approximately $570. When fuel and maintenance costs are combined together, the totals for both vehicles come out to approximately $2,500 a year and $1,200 a year for ICEVs and EVs, respectively. This initially shows that the EVs cut ICEV ownership costs in half, but these figures fail to consider 2 important realities. One, there are many service items on electric vehicles that are simply not present and not accounted for. Secondly, the reliability of EVs is drastically worse than combustion vehicles. According to Consumer Reports, problem rates for 2019 and 2020 EV models were drastically higher than their ICEV counterparts, despite the ICEV sample size being over 20 times the EV sample size. Therefore, it seems reasonable to assume that until EV development improves and EV production increases, the lower cost of ownership is not a valid reason to push towards replacing ICEVs. In the area of special privileges, however, EVs seem to take the lead. About 60% of Americans live within 2 miles of a public EV charger, and with about 61,000 charging stations nationwide, over 95% of the American public now lives in a county that has at least one public EV charging station. Much of this infrastructure development has come by means of government incentives and funding. Some states like Hawaii have passed laws requiring 1 in every 100 public parking spaces to be designated to EVs. But there is one major flaw with the argument of special privileges. The number of gas stations around America is a staggering 200,000. These stations are densely packed across America, and electrical infrastructure for EVs in many states like California simply is not adequate for a major push toward automotive electrification. The fourth argument for moving away from ICEVs and towards electric vehicles is that of performance. It is very common to hear that with the electric motors that EVs possess, instant torque is a great advantage. However, we must dig a little deeper into this claim. Joe Finnerty from the UK, in his article comparing 30 of the top-tier electric vehicles with nearly 1,900 different combustion sports cars which have been reproduced over the past 100 years, he comes to the conclusion that the average EV will outrun about 63% of decent performing combustion sports cars. However, this number is drastically skewed in the electric vehicle's favor. Therefore, due to the difference in pool sizes, the modern performance EV is only slightly faster on average than its modern combustion sports car counterpart, making higher performance a negligible factor in EV superiority. Before discussing current automotive research studies, the fifth and final argument prompting the banning of ICE EVs, the issue of environmental impact, must be analyzed. The most common argument driving the push away from combustion engines and toward EVs is primarily comprised of the concern regarding rising greenhouse gas emissions, or GHG emissions. It is the common belief that these rising numbers lead to increased smog and climate change. Countries like China are legitimately struggling with poor air quality. However, the entire world's transportation sector only accounts for 15% of global emissions. Thus, the plausibility of significantly reducing GHGs simply by ridding the world of ICE EVs is unlikely. Electrifying the world's transportation sector will barely impact emissions in general. But solving the issue of climate change is still a theoretical possibility. In the early 2000s, 30 of the world's most qualified economists came together to form the Copenhagen Consensus, a prioritized list of 10 of the top world's issues organized by importance given a $50 million budget. Climate change was at the bottom of that list, not because it was unimportant, but because the cost-benefit trade-off was simply not worth it. However, it is still necessary to research this argument further to reach a conclusion about the cost and benefits of banning ICE EVs. The first article that will be analyzed is Francisco C. Hernani's journal article, Environmental Impact Assessment of Increasing Electric Vehicles in the Brazilian Fleet. Hernani's research indicates that in the subject of China, the injection of EVs and retirement of combustion vehicles would end in massive negative human health impacts due to primary PM 2.5. The second piece of research that will be discussed is Troy Hawkins' Environmental Impacts of Hybrid and Electric Vehicles. This article deals with the assessment of 51 different studies pertaining to hybrid and electric vehicles. Ultimately, Hawkins comes to the conclusion that many authors do not provide accurate disposal process data. The third article that will be discussed is Yusuf Beiser's article, Life Cycle Environmental Impact Assessments and Comparisons of Alternative Fuels for Cleaner Vehicles. Ultimately, the article concludes that while a few environmental impact areas could be improved by introducing more HEVs and EVs, human toxicity levels would skyrocket due to production and disposal issues with EVs. A significant amount of data has been discussed in this paper. However, before a conclusion can be reached, we must discuss the limitations of current research. Issue number one is sample size. EVs simply lack a decent sample size to compare with their combustion vehicle counterparts. The second issue is research and development put forward in current EV studies. And until improved EV research is done on subjects like battery LCIs, low-impact disposal processes, and LCA emissions, there will be no significant evidence for supporting subsidies and government encouragement of EV adoption. The third issue is energy production, both in the global sense and within the scope of the United States. Only 39% of the world is producing energy via hydropower, nuclear, wind, and other renewable methods. Unfortunately, many studies do not take these facts into consideration, which fails to illuminate a major shortcoming with the mass acceptance of automotive electrification. With these three limitations taken into account, we can now reach a conclusion regarding the cost and benefits of banning internal combustion engine vehicles. The benefits of making the switch and eliminating combustion engines include possible government tax benefits, slightly lower ownership costs, slightly higher performance, and possible lowering of GWPs. The consequences of banning ICEVs include increased taxes to account for increased government spending, possible increase in ownership costs depending on the reliability of EV models, possible increase of GWPs depending on regional energy production, and a significant increase in global human toxicity. And therefore, as we analyze the benefits and consequences of banning internal combustion engine vehicles, the replacement of these combustion vehicles with electric vehicles does not currently appear to be a reasonable solution for reducing automotive environmental impact.